Hey, and welcome back to another episode. What if the real crisis of our lifetime isn't climate change or inequality, but the quieter tragedy that millions of talented people wake up every morning dreading the very work that pays their bills? Today's guest believes that we can solve both crises at once, and he's already put $1 billion on the line to prove it. Please welcome Florian Kemmerich, globally recognized impact investor, leadership mentor, and author of a just released book, On Vocation: How to Align Your Purpose with Your Profession. Over the past decade, Florian has mobilized close to $1 billion in impact capital, backing ventures that show profit and purpose can be scaled together. He serves on international boards, including For Africa and Alquest. He advises some of the world's most ambitious and mission-driven leaders and speaks across the continents about conscious capitalism, sustainability, and the future of meaningful work. Yet, what really makes him truly compelling is the life philosophy that he distills into like 4 short words: impact lives and share profits. Through this 7-step vocating framework, he has already helped hundreds of executives, entrepreneurs, and change makers trade burnout and quiet desperation for what he calls a fierce meaning, and that is work that feels like a calling because it actually is one. So, Florian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim, for your invitation. Looking very much forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you could be here. So, my first question is, how did you get into the topic of On Vocation?
Yeah, the story is actually when I was younger, I wanted to become a stand-up comedian. And my father talked me out of it, said you maybe want to get a real job first. So I got the real job. And then I worked my way through until the age of 33. And then I was running a company, have a family at home, and I was kind of not living my life because it wasn't really something I decided, but I was asking myself, I'm living a successful life, but is it me? And I actually don't know myself. And that's when I recognized at that time that I had been the absent subject of my own education. My education gave me the tools to learn to make a living, but not to live my life or understand who I am. And that was when a pivot started, and I started to try to find out who am I. And then I went into personal development methodologies to understand myself. Just went out of a corporate job into a roller coaster life and an entrepreneur path. And really through that, I was trying to find out what is it. And my first article about over 10 years ago describes that moment, saying, why is education not vocational? Why don't I have some tools for me to find what is actually what I want to do, not what I'm supposed to do? And that over the time triggered then the pivot that later on, I ended up in doing impact investing. That's what I do today. But it's really the part of people coming to me, Florian, you do impact. How can I do impact? And I asked them the same question. What's your vocation? And normally they don't know. Then I said, okay, can you go back? Can you take the time internally? And I give some exercises. They come back and to find what's your vocation. Once you have the vocation, then I distilled it down into something actionable. And that was the origin of On Vocation. As I would say, I help people to vocate, to dedicate themselves professionally to their vocation.
So, I just want to back it up real quick. Can we define the difference between the education and what is vocation?
Well, that is a great question. Yeah, the education is you get educated to be ready for life. Yeah, you have this primary school, secondary school, you have university or your profession, depending on really whatever you do. And that means in that sense, that your education is supposed to prepare you for life. What it doesn't do is preparing you about yourself. Things, how do you function emotionally? How do you function mentally? How do you function instinctively? That is not part of your education. And usually a vocation is something like a calling, When you are a child, usually between the age of 4 and 10, you have these dreams of contributing to the world. I have a vocation, I want to do something. But then life kicks in, then you get your tools. And even if you sometimes ask, like I did my parents, that this is what I would like to do. And they say, hey, you want to have a job first, you want to sustain life. So the distinction is education is to educate ourselves, but if it is not educating our own vocation, so it's not helping me to actually figure out what I want to do in life, then something is missing. So this is where that part, actually that was my pain at this time and my roller coaster life afterwards, which brings me to do what I do today, actually wanting to inspire people to start to vocate.
I love that. So when you said there was a pain point in your life that caused you to pivot, do you mind talking about that and what that was and what led you into your impact investment?
Yeah, I was at a corporate job, but I was then running a subsidiary. And again, there's nothing bad to say about the company, nothing bad to say about my colleagues. But you in a corporate life where you need to watch your back, you have politics, you have to do a job, you have to make sure that you hit, the numbers. Again, this is all part of a profitable company, which is normal. But I was asking myself, is it next 33 years, what do I do? Run a bigger company, a bigger family, have a bigger house? Because for me, the meaning was missing. And nothing bad against, it was healthcare, it was the corporation and the colleagues. But I was asking myself, am I actually doing what I want to do? This is a pain point where I said, hold a second, I need to change something. I didn't know what I needed to change because I didn't know myself. I only knew that I needed to change something. And so that's when I started to change things and started to learn about myself in order to figure out what I actually want to do with my life.
I'm reminded of the fact that you and I grew up differently. We grew up in two different countries. We have two different educational systems, but they all kind of sound similar in the way that they want to factory produce a worker, not necessarily somebody who's on vocation. So can you talk a little bit about your childhood education and your formalized stuff and how that led you to where you were, and then how that formed you into going, you know what, there's a lot of things missing?
It's a great question. And we have some similarities, you and I, even we come from different parts of the world, which is actually the beauty of it. So I moved with my parents to the border of Switzerland on the German side, and people speak a dialect. I didn't speak the dialect, so I was kind of a foreigner in the same country. And my father was a doctor, my mom was a teacher, and so was from the privileged side in the village or in the small city I grew up. And actually in the school, 5, 6 years old, I got bullied and aggravated physically. So I didn't take too much of a fuss around it, didn't talk too much, but my parents kind of saw that, and then they put me in judo. So judo is something to toughen up. So I went into judo. It was very hard the first years, but then I went all the way up. I went really up to national team, to the Bundesliga. I was, really on a level. I actually did my sports boarding school the last years because I couldn't keep school and sports. So I went to a specifically high-end sports boarding school. But at the end, I did this actually because it's a reaction to a field outside. So at the age of 18, I then said, hold a second, this is not my future. This is not my profession. My national trainer was preparing me to go to Barcelona 92 to the Olympics. And a lot of people saying, why wouldn't you stop when you go to the Olympics? Because even if I win something, what do I do afterwards? I end up being a judo teacher in a dojo. And there's nothing bad about it, but that was not my vocation. Because you have people which are really good at it. Sometimes like someone studying medicine, not having a vocation to be a doctor, that is very hard. It goes against what you want. Only if you have a vocation, or if you're a chef in a cuisine. The working hours are really difficult. Only if you have a real vocation. So that was for me, that said, okay, sorry, I need to change. Then the reaction was, at this time, I started to do music. We have the carnival. I was entertaining people. And even with the band music we started, we had more and more people. And I was doing a lot of, stand-up comedians things with music. So I saw myself actually doing this to serve people. A little bit the idea to numb out pain, the anxieties of life. And I'm still a big fan of stand-up comedians, can give you a whole list and I like to look at them. And I look at also artistically what they do, and I really enjoy it. But that's why my father said, hold a second, there are great artists out there, but not making a living. Maybe you want to study something normal. So I went to study business administration with a specialty in marketing. Even though my father was a doctor, he's asked me, when do you want to be a doctor? No, I don't have the vocation to be a doctor. Yeah, it's really admirable, but not for me. But then I went to a healthcare company. Yeah. And then I did typically what you do. You start with the first job. And over years, 15 years, I stayed at the same healthcare group. I went a little bit abroad, nationally, all of that things. And I hit the ceiling, but it was what you're supposed to do. So I was successful at the age of 33. But then the question was coming, hold a second, what is life? What is it? And I asked myself at my deathbed, other than having had a family and a bank account, what's the things I want to have left behind? What's the contribution I can give to the people, to humanity, or to the planet? Those are the things which came up. And so this is where I derailed from the so far normal and successful path and went into something to explore a little bit left and right to figure my things out, which was pretty stressful and painful. Sleepless nights sometimes, anxieties, making some mistakes. But since I am now for over 10 years in an area, my leitmotif is to impact lives and share profits. Yeah, so the part to inspire others to do more. On the question I asked myself, understanding that the origin, the cause is not knowing your vocation and not knowing what to do with your vocation. That's the part which excites me today. And I'm grateful after my rollercoaster life to do what I do today.
Yeah, I think it's important that we find our vocation and we find what it is. So for parents out there who are listening to this, or teachers or educators, how can focusing on, yes, we need those skills, we need the, necessities in life, but how can we help guide to really bring out within us what our vocation is?
Yeah, the point is the following. Usually, we are born vulnerable. Yeah. So you're born as a baby, you need somebody to care, you could not survive. Later on, you want to, as a parent, to make sure that your kids get ready for things of life. And life is unforeseen, things might happen, and you need to make sure that you can sustain a life, which is usually not the one where you say, I inspire, have a calling, and I want to contribute. Hold a second, feet on the ground, don't dream, do your things. Yeah. And that's the part where, let me give you an example. Since I published the book, and by the way, just from the book side, as people were coming to me and asking me on the vocation, and I helped more and more people, I inspired, accomplished people as much as younger people.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would have probably asked myself, I would have loved to have that know-how and that information when I was 20, not 50.
Yep.
And so on that side is also that the fundamental flaw is saying you make money and then you do good. Yeah, and you believe that there's two things, this one first, then the other, which is wrong. You can do both at the same time. So the only thing I do is when people figure out what they really care for, what they really want to resolve, then you say, okay, what can you actually do with it? So let me give you an example. I was there giving an On Vocation workshop, and you have a young person saying, Florian, I studied so hard to learn financial modeling, years and really hard. And now AI will do this better than I will ever can in my life, so my future is doomed. AI is taking my job away. And I said, hold a second, okay, let's put the job aside. What's your vocation? And he says, what do you mean with vocation? What is something, go back to what you would really care for and contribute. So then we did an exercise. He says, you know what? I really care about climate change. Whether it's man-made or not, things are changing. Yeah, so I care about humans adapt to that changing climate. I said, here you go. You have a vocation. And then he said, what? Now take your superpower, being good in finance, put this together. And then you have a theory of change because you could apply your skill set, being good in finance, in the climate adaptation of the people. And if you then now distill it, okay, you have sectors you can apply for. I said, what sectors? I mean, there's so many. You go to an insurance companies have to deal and measure risk with climate change, whether they want or not, because this is a big portion, financial impact in them. You go to the financial markets, investors. You go to companies, big corporations, whether this is in the FMCG, whether this is supply chain, this have to deal with heat waves and problems and things. You have to go into companies, you can really. And so he looked at me and said, right. So you have an example of taking a vocation with a skill set, a superpower, and you start to vocate. 3 months later, I got a very nice message saying, Florian, I got it. I'm vocating, and I don't know what to do.
That's a great story. And you mentioned earlier that people were, serving to numb pain, and you found yourself doing that. And then you tell a story about this young man. He was like, I studied real hard to do this thing. Now he's vocating. When people are on vocation or on mission and assignment for what is in store for their lives, how does that numbingness of pain go down and the joy and happiness increase over time?
That is a great question, Tim. So in one of my steps, the 7 steps I describe, I talk about stress. It is a big difference, and you can see some experts, there's amazing TED Talks about that, by the way, saying self-inflicted stress is a challenge. I want to go for this. I know it's risky. I know it's tough, but it's my decision. Maybe I fail, but I'm not stressed out. I'm not there's no anxiety. It's just a challenge. So this is actually healthy.
Mhm.
The stress you're exposed to because something happens around you and you stress around is very different. So that applies in exactly the same way. If you decide what you want to do and it's a challenge for you, it might be hard, it might be difficult, it might be financially not rewarding, I might take some risks. It is me deciding those. So the stress I'm exposing myself is my own, which increases, my adrenaline going through, which is very different to saying I'm in a job, I just lost my job, I have a new job, or I'm doing a job I don't know. Yeah. So it's very different because then you're exposed, and that is really bad for your health. So this is the big difference. So therefore, I'm encouraging people to say, figure out what you want to do and dare do it. Because if you believe I take the safe bet,